Questionable Ethics, written by Calix Winterridge. Chapter 12, Proverbial Thinker, Part 2. I would watch the Kieran return to his produce and move past the counter. He would walk to the back of the small structure and grab a brown bag of groceries with his magic. The bag was resting on a stool so that it was isolated from the ground. Probably a precautionary measure to ensure that the produce inside the bag wasn't eaten by insects or other small animals. Short Change would return to me, the bag aloft in his magic. Short Change would return to me, the bag aloft by his magic. He would levitate the bag into my arms, and my hands would close around it like a football. I held it there against me firm enough so that when his magic faded away, I would have a good grasp on the bag so that it didn't immediately fall on the ground and spill all over the grass of the market. Sure enough, when the magical aura surrounding the pre-packed produce displaced, the weight of the bag would become known to me. It wasn't that heavy, but it was definitely weighty enough for me to feel it.
This produce has already been paid for in advance. The only thing you need to do is deliver the groceries to the Kieran who bought them yesterday. The Kieran's name is Ceritica Flames, and she lives over, well, let me show you.
Short Change would quickly trot around the produce stall and would stop around back, facing away from the market. He would point with his hoof across the way towards a pond with a fountain in the middle of it. The river I had crossed before getting to the market curved in such a way that this fountain pond and the river were two separate bodies of water. He would turn to me and go on to explain.
She lives past that pond. Follow a path directly behind it and continue forward until you come to a fork in the path. Once you do, take a left and she'll be on the fourth house on the right. Her house has a red door, and I think, if my memory serves me correctly, a brown welcome mat out front.
I would quickly mentally jot all of this information down.
Ceritica herself is a bright faded yellow mare with a light lime green mane. She also has a pair of deep, beautiful, ruby red eyes. If you can't find her house, look around for her, or ask Dr. Kieran on the street she lives on, but I'm sure you can't miss her,
he would explain. After listening to the description he provided me, I would notice his stutter, and his description of Ceritica. I at first found it a bit strange that this storekeeper knew how to get to Ceretica's house just off the top of his head. Then again, she may have done this before, or many times, and he's memorized the route. But after listening to how he described her eyes, I knew something else was going on, but I wouldn't say anything. Alright, I got it. House with a red door and brown welcome mat out front. I'll be back as quick as I can, I said as professionally as I could before turning away from him and beginning my journey towards the fountain. But before I made it too far, I heard Short Change call out to me.
Oh, and don't even think about looking in the bag. I mean, taking stuff from the bag.
I would pause for a moment, spinning around to look at him with a brow raised. I gave him a reassuring wave and a nod before continuing forward towards my destination. It was obvious to me that I wouldn't take anything from the bag. I don't steal other people's property. That goes without saying. But what exactly did he mean by "don't look inside"? My eyes would drift down to the bag as I got further from the market. To be honest, he had piqued my curiosity, and something was telling me that whatever was in the bag had something to do with his liberal description of her eyes. But I wouldn't breach his level of trust in me. After all, I just convinced him that I was up to the task. The last thing I needed to do was squander my first and maybe only opportunity here. So I pressed on. Other Kieran outside the market would trot about their day, saddlebags over their backs filled with fruits, vegetables, and even grain products like bread loaves and muffins. And, of course, keeping with the status quo, every time I got close to a Kieran, they would turn away slightly so that my path and theirs didn't collide, once again making me feel isolated in a crowd. Of course, I know if I were in their shoes, or hooves, I'd be doing the same thing, so I guess I can't blame them too much for carrying on the way they do. I just hope in the future I'll be able to show them that I'm not some alien from outer space, even though I totally am. Regardless of how well the population was coping with me being in their community, I passed the fountain and continued down the path directly behind it as per Short Change instructions. As I walked down this path, groceries clinging to my chest, with both hands and arms, I would finally have time to really look at the housing these Kieran live in. Some of these homes were built into hillsides with simple windows and large round semicircle doors, like hobbit holes. Other houses were built on the inside of large hollowed out trees that still somewhat had leaves on their treetops and were bearing fruit. I guess they managed to preserve the tree's life while still living inside of it. I guess the only thing I could compare it to is like a woodpecker making a nest. Of course, not exactly like woodpeckers. I'm sure the Kieran don't have sharpened and hardened beaks that allow them to tunnel inside of trees, granting them the ability to make these homes. Of course, the image of a Kieran slamming their snout into a tree over and over again, attempting to make a house like Woody the Woodpecker, was a humorous thing to image. It was so humorous that I got distracted by the cartoonish image of a Kieran woodpecker, long enough to bump into a tree in front of me, marking the split in the path that I was looking for. Ouch! Fuck! I hope nobody saw that. I mumbled to myself as I looked around embarrassed. I would take a few steps back and rub my nose as it was the first thing to make contact with the tree, and now it hurt quite a bit. I readjusted my helmet while making sure the night vision goggles I had were unaffected by my sudden collision. I would then look around at my surroundings just to make sure nobody saw that. And as I did, my eyes glanced over something that made my heart skip a beat as I did a double take, trying to confirm what I saw. I could have sworn I saw another Marine. As I scanned past the path to the right of me, I saw something standing right next to one of the hobbit hole-looking houses. Obscured slightly to the right of the dwelling, there was an imposed silhouette of a figure. One that of a human-shaped and standing tall and upright. It was almost like a shadow without a person casting it. It had turned three-dimensional and was staring at me, and the silhouette itself had a distinct outline of a Marine in full battle rattle. And what made it worse was that the first time I glanced across it, I could have sworn I heard radio static coming from my PRC 152, but that was impossible. It was turned off. When I did my double take, it wasn't there anymore, and I didn't hear any static. I stood there frozen for a minute, staring at where I thought I saw something. Time seemed to slow down as I looked in disbelief, adjusting my eyes over and over again, as if what I had saw was just a mistake. I then, after a few minutes of unending staring at nothing, would just shrug it off as my mind playing tricks on me. After all, has been quite some time since I've seen a combat zone. Surely my brain can cope without combat. There was no doubt in my mind that I couldn't. So, giving off a dry singular laugh, I turned to my left and headed down the correct path, soon ending up at the fourth house on the right. And sure enough, red door, brown welcome mat. This was the home of Seritica Flames, one of the Kierans that regularly visits me at my campsite, along with Autumn and her other friends. I wanted to mention earlier that I knew who Seritica was, but I forgot to say something to shortchange. It didn't really matter after all. If it did, I would have said something. Seritica's house was one of the hobbit hole-styled ones, which, besides the red door, blended in with the other homes surrounding it. I bent down a bit to level myself with the door that was just big enough for me to squeeze myself through, without any gear, on personage, of course. I placed the bag of groceries down on the stone path that led to her welcome mat, and would give the wooden door a few hearty knocks, hopefully getting her attention, and it did. For after a few seconds of waiting, Seritica answered the door, and would gasp at the sight of me instead of a Kieran. "Adrian, what are you doing here? And where's your mask? I thought you said you'd die if you didn't have it on," she exclaimed, stepping out of her home to get a better look at my face. As this was probably one, if not the first time she had seen me with my mask off, I would chuckle a bit. The only time I would die if I weren't wearing this mask is if I were in a toxic environment. This isn't a toxic environment, at least I don't think so. If so, the toxins are tasteless. Seritica would squint and look around my exposed face, focusing on what I assumed were many pockmarks, gashes, scrapes, and bruises from my time in Black Mesa, and outside Black Mesa. My face felt compared to a gravel road because of being enlisted for 9 years, and to be quite honest, I can't remember the last time I looked into a mirror. Would I even want to be judging by how Saritica was grimacing at me?
I see. Well, anyway, why are you here?
She asked, now staring up into my eyes as I stared back. And as I did, I could see why Shortchange described them the way he did. Her eyes were big and deep, almost like you could fall in if you weren't careful. They looked beautiful, for a Kirin, of course. I handed her groceries I was given by Shortchange and explained my predicament to her. I explained I was out of food and I needed to raise funds for myself in order to feed my body without relying on others to get food for me. I told her I didn't feel comfortable taking food away from Autumn or using her as a way to obtain food. I said I felt obligated to work for my meals instead of being a charity. Of course, she protested, saying that if she knew I was out of food, she would have bought me some without question. Which was nice to hear, knowing that she would go out of her way like that meant she wasn't afraid of me anymore. Which was, of course, in stark contrast to just earlier last week when she wouldn't come near me. I'm glad she was comfortable near me. It made me feel pretty happy. After discussing the food situation, we would talk for a bit longer. As we did, I found out that she was just as interested in myself as she was in my equipment. As we spoke, she would constantly point out bits of gear on my PCV, and would ask what they did before moving on to the next bit of kit I had, which could easily be identified as its own separate entity on my LBV. Things like my radio, magazine pouches, compass pouch, my IFAK, etc. It was overall quite surprising that she took this great of interest in my gear. Then again, a lot of things have been surprising about these Kirin, and I sort of knew already that she was more interested in the tech I carried than me as a person when we first met. Which I didn't mind, of course. After all, she did just offer to bring me food, which was a good enough extension of friendship for me to overlook her tech obsession. Which I didn't mind anyway. I mean, I could sit here for hours talking about the PCV and the rest of my gear with her if she wanted to, but I also wanted to see if Shortchange has any more work. But on top of this, Saritica's curiosity caught my attention. Her broad, inquisitive mind, yearning to learn about my tech, would have surely pushed her over the top of this valley into the great beyond if I had not shown up like I did. In fact, I'm sure she would have left a long time ago to explore this world with many others following her example. It felt like the Kirin had been isolated here for a long time, being deprived of outside contact, yet yearning to learn so much about what they don't know. I can see it in Autumn too. I feel like they're being kept here, forced to stay within the tall natural walls of this mountain valley, living in simple homes whilst living in ignorance. The Kirin's inquisitive nature shows that they may have once existed beyond this valley at some point. I think maybe a conversation with Rainshine would be in order soon. Maybe it's just my inquisitive mind being overly proactive with these sort of things, but I feel like there's a story here that I'm reading deep enough into to get to the right amounts of context. After talking with Saritica for a while longer and exhausting all my time, I bid farewell to her and turned around to leave. As I started walking away, I heard her exclaim out in awe. I turned around to see her levitating the bag of groceries with her magic, while reading from what looked like a birthday card. I didn't recall her having one of those before I gave her the groceries. As I focused on what she was looking at, I finally understood why Shortchange had told me not to look inside the bag. This card was completely white except for one big red heart on the face of the card that was looking at me, and judging by the blush that had manifested on her cheeks, it was safe to assume this was a love letter. How adorable. I couldn't help but smile, a genuine smile at this. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that chapter today. That was the final part of this chapter, that is. And, damn, did I have a fun time making it. I really hope you guys enjoyed the sound effects that I added, the one sound effect that I added in. Yeah, that's me. And the bit of music change for that little eerie part. I had fun making that. It's been a while since I've done one with sound effects, so thought I'd throw that in. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. Tell me what your favorite part was in the comments down below. I'll make sure to read them, and I'll respond if it's worthy of one. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. Have a good day, and stay golden, everyone.